Now the first step in the 5-step plan is having your equipment checked. Since I have not personally met Scott, I have not had an opportunity to actually check his equipment. So at this time, Scott, if you have not had that opportunity to go ahead and have your equipment checked for loft, lie angle, length of the club, and the loading of the shaft, then I would suggest that you go ahead and do that right away. We want that shaft to be uniform from driver to pitching wedge so that you can make sure that you only have to accomplish one golf swing and that the club responds to your golf swing properly. So moving on to step 2 would be the setup. The most prominent feature of Scott's setup would be the ball position. We see that it is based probably about center of between his feet. Ideally, I would actually prefer, even with the irons, that ball position be a little bit more forward. The problem being with such a far back position is that Scott has decided to go ahead and shift his weight back to his right foot in order to try to keep himself back behind that ball. So as we can clearly see, if I draw a couple of lines down dropping from each shoulder, we can see that this right shoulder is pretty far outside of his right foot, while his left shoulder is inside of his left foot. That puts his body center just over the inside of his back foot and behind the ball. Now ideally, of course, like I said, you want the swing axis to be behind the ball, but unfortunately he's so close to his right foot that he is going to be making a rather large shift on his way going forward, because your equilibrium will always try to equal things back out in your balance, and he's going to end up pretty well forward of that ball by the time he gets to impact. The other significant feature of his golf swing would be the hand position is smack dab in the middle of his body, or mid-body hands. He does have a pretty strong, solid grip here. It's very neutral. I don't see an over-rotation of either forearm. But by having those hands back at the mid-body, what we're actually having is where that club is nearly straight up and down behind that ball. This is not going to promote a hands ahead of the ball type of approach by the time that he reaches the ball. And in fact, he's probably going to end up just flinging the club head at the ball because he's not developing a good mental picture of what he wants impact to be. Ideally, we should see the hands up here off of the left thigh, because if we had, even with that position and then the ball position there, we should still be seeing a forward-leaning shaft from hand position to just slightly behind the ball that's going to be promoting much more of a descending blow of the club head to the ball. Moving on to step 3, which would be the finish, we see that his weight is fully transferred onto his front foot. I don't see his front foot at all rolling out. He's pretty well flat on it. And I also like the fact that his right shoulder is lower than his left, with both of his elbows still out in front of his chest. This elbows out in front and the right shoulder drop below the left shoulder is a clear indication that he released the club a lot through impact. His right hip does not appear to have gone all the way through this shot. And as a result, we also see that the spikes of his back foot are still basically facing this building off in the background, as opposed to they should be facing much more towards the basket of golf balls back behind him. This is a clear indication that he has used a lot of upper body movement in order to generate the swing, while his lower body did very little. Moving on to step 4 would be the balance of his golf swing. And the best way to identify the balance of Scott's golf swing is to go ahead and figure out where his axis point is in the golf swing. Ideally, this is between your shoulders, directly behind the sternum, and where the spine is. That would place it right about there, about where his chin is at the setup. As we move forward on through his golf swing all the way to the top, what we're going to see is that he is in fact lifted up quite considerably. And since he is going to balance out and try to equalize where his weight is, he's in fact shifted somewhat back towards the target as he swung the club back. Now as we progress all the way down into impact, we're going to see that he is shifting pretty well forward onto his front foot, and by the time that he gets there, we see that the next progression in his swing puts his axis actually out in front of the golf ball. Now moving on all the way to the finish, we're going to see that his axis is again still even more forward, and now it's gone all the way back up again. So the progression that we have through a Scott swing is where he has at setup from there, which is nice and behind the ball, but as he swings back up through his backswing, he's shifted his weight shifted his swing center up away from the ball and back towards the target. Then as he comes forward, now he is swinging back down to the ball to try to get his swing axis back closer to the ball. And then, of course, on the finish, his swing center moves back up away from the ball. And we see this zigzag pattern in his swing axis. Since Scott's swing balance has shifted so much throughout this golf swing, what we're going to find is that he has to make up for that shift in where the axis point is by using some form of tension during his golf swing to try to make sure that that club head reaches the golf ball. The fifth step, of course, is being tension. And what we're going to find is that as he takes the club back, we don't have a whole heck of a lot of tension being crept in. Now, there may be a little bit of an early wrist cock, but I don't believe that he's really tense here. He looks pretty soft. It looks like maybe just the club head is starting to take over the swing, and that's what's making his wrists hinge. By the time that he reaches the top, we see that that left elbow is pretty soft, even though he's still fully extended. And that's something that we really like to see. That's a good sign that he has, in fact, stayed relaxed throughout that golf swing. As we progress forward, we're going to see that he is still relaxed, and by this particular point in his golf swing, I'm going to try to represent his what we call the lag, where we have this angle between his left arm and the shaft is pretty acute. There's almost a 45-degree angle between the shaft and his forearm. That's a lot of lag, and there's a lot of potential for distance out of this swing. Unfortunately, at this point now, because his swing center is so far ahead of the ball, he is going to have to make up for that distance gap by throwing his right arm at the ball. And by this time, what we see is that that left arm is no longer as angled with the shaft as it was before. We're going to see that, again, that swing center, the axis of his golf swing, is in fact a little bit too far in front of the golf ball. He, again, has to make up for that by throwing the club out, and we see that his club is fairly shallow to the golf ball. Its approach to the golf ball is fairly low to the ground, and by the time that he actually strikes the ball, there's very, very little actual arc to the path that his club head takes. That means he is not able to accelerate, and you can also see at impact that his hands are here just barely inside of his left thigh. This action is commonly referred to as casting, where the right arm basically pushes out to throw the club head to the ball early in the downswing. And this is all derived because that swing center is unfortunately too far ahead of the ball, and whenever you throw your right arm out at the ball, you are creating a lot of tension in your golf swing, and that's creating that early release. If Scott were to be taking a lesson from me, the very first thing we would start with would be that ball position. I would definitely place it there. And I would continue to permit Scott to have this spine angle, which is actually quite good, but simply shifting it forward a little bit by moving his left hip out more over his arch of his front foot would put him in a much better position than where he is currently, where he's back too much weight on his back foot. I would also move his hands much more forward so that they're off of his left thigh here and have a little bit more angle to that shaft, so that now his hands are leading the club head in through impact. And at setup, he's basically setting himself up to go ahead and produce that position. Moving on from there, we would discuss all the other things such as balance and the relaxation. But I think primarily the setup would be the very first and most important thing for Scott to go over and fix first.